Hi, and welcome back to the Health Podcast. I'm your host, Madison Murphy Barney. As you know, it's always me behind this microphone, and I'm so glad you're here today. And today kicks off the start of a series I'm going to be working on, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But before I do, I just want to invite you to reach out if you're ready to book your Story Lab session. I have had a few sessions since the beginning of the year. One that happened in January, and that organization has already won some grants that previously they'd been passed over for because of some of the insights we found in the session and ways they can leverage story to show their impact and show it to funders. And so that's been really exciting. Had another organization that we met in February, and already today I'm recording this March 18th, and they have implemented some of the story gathering techniques from story driven strategy and have already seen huge increase in programmatic um, accessing, like people coming in and using their programs, and then also a huge change in the reach of their social media and their email campaigns to donors using, the stories from story driven strategy techniques in order to that it can be used as like both communications and funding tools. So please reach out if you would like to find time to schedule your session. And so what's this series? So this series, we're going to talk about at this point five, but maybe more species, and how these different species work to one, improve and contribute to our natural world, but also how we can learn from them in the work we're doing with community and advocacy and communications and strategy work. And so, sometimes it feels like the work we do is so complicated and we're the only ones, we have to figure out the best way to do it. And then I'm often reminded that if we just zoom out a little bit and look at the species around us, they have so many insights and lessons for us on how to better contribute to an ecosystem of, be it storytelling or strategy or story driven strategy or community engagement work. And so I always think it's just so helpful to look to our other than human siblings and just see, what it is that works for them and how we can, emulate them in the work that we are doing. And so, I had a really great series of conversations with another Indigenous colleague actually last year sometime. And it really just got me thinking about how we can continue to learn from other species when it comes to the work that we all want to be doing and are so committed to doing. And it takes some of the pressure off, right? Like, sometimes it can be so hard to like be comparing strategies and feel like all this pressure to have, certain things figured out or finding the best way. And then when we remember that, we have so many teachers and the blueprint already exists, and we can look beyond the traditional ways that we've thought about this work in the past, and we might find new ideas or new ways of thinking or new connections that really bring this like freshness to our work and this aliveness to our work. And so the first species we're going to talk about in this series is bees. Um, and, um, you know, we all know that bees are in so many ways the creatures that keep us fed and keep us clothed and keep so many of the systems in our world functioning. And we all know, that there are pollinators and things like that, but there are some things that about bees that may be a little less obvious, but really contribute to the ways that they live and socialize and care for their communities. So, one thing to think about is that bees circulate around the landscape. They don't convene meetings in central places. They travel and navigate through their given geography, their given zone. And as they travel, they both communicate and serve, right? They gather pollen and nectar that meets their needs and also the health of the wider ecosystem. So this is really interesting to me when we think about story-driven strategy, and that's that circle of that I always talk about, that I think is so important of, making sure that the way that we're collecting stories and then turning them into strategy becomes an ecosystem that fuels itself, that is, by gathering the stories itself, is an act of trust building and service, and then using those to create programs that are stronger and meet the needs of the communities we serve, and then moving into having that strategy with buy-in and implementing that strategy so you have more impact, and that impact gets the insight or the attention of funders and decision makers, all through those, all derived from what you heard and listening to your community. And then that cycle continues and feeds itself. And so when we think about emulating bees and learning from bees, we can think about how our processes of engaging the community, of listening to the community, can serve both us and the wider ecosystem of the community that we serve. One other thing that I love about bees is that they iterate, right? They circulate over and over again. They're continuously feeding and finding places to travel while they're also stitching together resources that serve that wider common purpose. So they don't, they, in their travel of pollination and of feeding themselves and feeding their community and serving their hive, they try different paths and different ways. And, they're constantly iterating. And I think that's so important. So often there's so much pressure, right? And it goes back to the conversation we've been having over the past month about urgency, but there can just be so much pressure to get everything right. And when we remember that this iteration process itself can be serving of the community, and that we can take, everything as a lesson, and that can be really helpful and take some of the pressure off of getting it right. Because there's no, this is something I say to my doula clients all the time, but also my consulting clients. It's really relevant to both, is that, there's no right way to do a lot of this work we're trying to do. And there are just very few, very wrong ways, but there's so many right ways. And so when we think about that, how do we get to those right ways, right? We get to them through iterating and through trying new things. And so I just think that's a really important thing to bring into our work. And it can feel like we don't have time to iterate, but when we remember that each iteration gets us closer to the most effective, impactful way of work, and that all of our the other species in nature also iterate, we can remember this is innate in us, right? It's innate in the process to have some reps in and to continually try new ways of going about things. And that iteration process is just so rich and so fruitful. And one thing that I learned about bees a couple of years ago that I just love, one, I love the name, and also I love the purpose, is they perform something called a waggle dance. And this waggle dance communicates the direction and distance of rich resources. So this is a behavior that increases both efficiency and productivity of the whole, and communicates in a really unique way so that everyone around knows, the best direction and place where they can share in the abundance, right? So the bee doesn't find it and keep it to themselves. They find the resources, they find the connectivity and the nourishment, and they then dance to communicate in a way that shows, okay, you all can go there too, right? What I have found, this richness, this wealth, these resources are for all of us. And so this stops, the other bees from having to, search in, let's say, the wrong direction, or continue to, follow paths that might not be as fruitful, and instead gets everybody aligned to move in the same direction, and get, use the resources the most efficiently. And it might sound a little like I'm just contradicting myself between the iterating and the getting people and organizations and bees, in increased efficiency, but they're, process of the same, right? All the bees are iterating on the different paths and the different ways of finding and identifying resources. And then once they find them, they let others know, okay, we found this, this is working, this is where you can find what you're looking for. And so it's a balance of both, right? There's space for both, especially in different parts of the processes that we all find ourselves in the work we're doing. And then I mentioned in the beginning how much of food and clothing and everything that we use and have depends on bees. But just to put a sharper number on that, it's 75% of the global food crops depend on pollination. So bees are the primary pollinators, and their work is not like a part of the system. Their work is the system, right? And when we think about story-driven strategy, we think about building the system based on community wisdom and insights from the community. Of course, that community, as I always say, includes your teams and includes organizational wisdom. But just making that the system makes everything else work. When we focus on the most effective tool we have, um, and spread that all across our ecosystem, then we have this like really wide ecosystem of pollination and cross pollination as well. Um, One thing that's also worth noting that I find just like very cute is that it should be impossible for bees to fly, but they do it anyway. Like, scientists and people with a lot of different and increased expertise from what I have, looked at the body of the bees and the wings they have, and it just does not make any sense that they fly, but they do. And that is worth noting in the work we do. And I think about this often when I get on planes too. I'm like, we don't really know why this works, but it does, and we're doing it. So let's go. And um, there's another like really interesting point too about what bees do is they band together to address predators. And the way that they do this is they buzz so much that they heat predators to death. And I think that's just like such an incredible um, just story of like how they use the tools they have, right? Like bees aren't like big or powerful in the traditional sense we might think, but they use the tools they have to stop intruders. And I think, right now, so many of us are doing work that funding is changing, and we really need to come together and collaborate on the work that we do to share resourcing and insights. And we need to move quickly, but not urgently, and all of these things. And so I'm obviously not suggesting that we do anything that heats anybody to death, but there's something about making an environment where we are so strong and so collaborative and so um, synchronized that we can come together and make it inhospitable for others who are trying to sideline the work or shut the work down to be in our space. And so I just think that's worth thinking about too. And I just think too, like bees are obviously, it almost goes without saying, such champions of cooperating with others. Them doing their thing and living their lives make sure that 75% of the food and crops and other plants in the world exist, right? And can continue to grow. And so I think when we think about collaboration across different um, species and ecosystems, and public health has for so long been a part of the world and a profession that is so siloed out and can be so hard to access. That how do we think about cooperating with other industries and other types of organizations that do very different work, but that we need to come together with? And I think about this especially in like if we think about social determinants of health too, right? Is we want to be how are we collaborating with education? How are we collaborating with housing? How is public health really finding a way to be a part of an ecosystem rather than like an isolated species? And this is true of justice organizations and other organizations as well. And so, I just think it's so clear in the way that our professions and health and justice are organized that we've certainly like overinvested in key representatives meeting to design and decide. And we really undervalued the importance of that like deep place-based listening, sharing, innovating, web making, um, and and we can change that, right? Story-driven strategy is a tool to change that. And so, four of the main takeaways that I think about when I think about how we can learn from bees and um, incorporate their wisdom into our work is circulating over convening, right? Most organizations, and it's hard to resist this, right? Default to meeting, having that town hall, that survey. But if we think about what bees do, they travel, right? They show up where the resources are. And so when we really embody the story driven strategy framework of listen, design, move, um, it starts in that way. We go where people are, not where it's convenient for us, and do that deep listening, geographically using the technology we have. I think, especially in the rural context that I'm so often working in and where so much of our communities live, you have to go to them and you have to meet them there and make sure that we're doing that listening all over the places that we are responsible for serving. And a part of that, right, is that sense of service while you travel. So, as I talked about, bees don't just extract pollen, they pollinate. And that active gathering is also the giving. And so, when we do story driven work right, that listening process itself builds trust, as I mentioned before. And we're not just, showing up, recording stories, leaving, and not having, the buy in or, not creating assets that our community never sees or strategy that doesn't include the wisdom that we've heard. And so we want to think of it as service while we do that listening. And yeah, and just remembering, right, that there's the iteration, and that we can build iteration into our processes and into our strategies, especially when we've listened deeply to community and to our colleagues. And like that cycle, that circular process I was talking about earlier, we really want to think about that in terms of how we can, really just like that in itself is a form of iteration, but at each step of the iteration, we get stronger and stronger and impact along the way, right? So we can iterate within the process, and iteration is built into the story driven strategy process so that it's not like, okay, we have to iterate over here, but put things in practice here. It's something that we do as a part of bringing everyone along and ensuring the impact and reach of our work. And so I just wonder if it might be a fun thing to do to think about, what it might look like if your organization stopped trying to control narrative and started, circulating through the community, acting in this be like way, embracing iteration, and using these acts of listening that are also acts of building. And so, as I mentioned, this is going to be a series. I'll be back with, right now, I said, a number of different species, and each one will have their own different lessons, and I hope that it's just an interesting exercise in how we can go beyond the thinking that we're often, put into with our deadlines and our silos and the way we're taught to think, and instead really just open it up as, this, like, we have this whole planet of teachers, and the species that I touch on are um some that stand out to me, and it might bring you to thinking of some of the other species that you're in relationship with as well. And so I just hope it's a great thought exercise, and I'm so excited for this series. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I am available if you're ready to book your Story Lab session or any other ways you want to collaborate. Please reach out. And I'm so looking forward to hearing your thoughts. Feel free to comment or reach out to me on LinkedIn or email with any thoughts that this is bringing up for you. But thank you for tuning in. I'm so grateful that you're here, and I look forward to reconnecting soon. Take care.